I love how with a simple title or a brief, core message, here's what we're going to talk about. Musicians just always seem to pick up somehow. They tap into that universal energy and find the perfect songs every time, no matter where I go. And thank you for listening to Spirit and knowing what song you needed to know to bring to us today, because every song that she has brought to us this morning so far just ties so perfectly in, because our message today, our talk today, is about that journey. It's about knowing what we need to know, where we're going in the first place, and knowing when we're heading the wrong way. And sometimes it takes a simple little recognition that something's off in our lives, in our community, in our nation, to realize that I need to start heading a new direction. I need to get off this path that I'm on and shift gears a little bit. I came across a poem by Hafiz about a week ago. I was looking for something else, and this poem just showed up. So, had to trust it, because it was too perfect. The title of the poem is Damn Thirsty. Now, I questioned the universe in bringing me a poem titled Damn Thirsty, and universe saying, no, go share this at churches. And yet, it is so perfect. So simple. First, the fish needs to say, something ain't right about this camel ride. And I'm feeling so damn thirsty. Right? The fish on a camel. Yeah, all of us are on a spiritual journey going somewhere, and sometimes we need to stop and say, I'm thirsty. Right? We forget that life itself is this journey, this constant calling back to our source, back to the one that nourishes us, that feeds us, that gives us the water of life that we need. That's the journey that we're on, and our continual quest is to know that truth. But our continual quest is to be a fish in the ocean, knowing it's a fish in the ocean and not being stuck out in the desert somewhere. Now, luckily, we always know what we need to know, where we need to be, what we need to do, when we need to know it. And those knowings aren't always blaring signs. A lot of times they come in the form of dreams or ideas for ourselves, things that are calling us to do them. I call them the dreams of our heart, because they're a little bit different than, I don't know, like I'm dreaming of having an ice cream or something, like that's sort of a temporary, short-term goal. But the dreams of our heart are those things that are persistent. They are those things that when you think about them, they just infuse you with passion. Just the thought of them. They're persistent, they're passionate. Those are the dreams of our heart. And they're the ones that call to be expressed in our lives. And as we follow them, we are really following that path, that journey back home to knowing God in our lives, to knowing God as an expression of who we are, or rather us as an expression of who God is. I was at one point in a coffee shop, and I overheard two women having a conversation. And the one was sharing with the other that her husband had a dream of owning an RV and traveling the country. She said he talked about this all the time, planned things out, where they would go. But whenever she would say, well, when are we going to do that? He would say, well, when I retire. When I retire, we'll get to that. It's not practical now. Now, I don't know the whole story because, of course, I'm just sort of eavesdropping on these two women in the coffee shop. Right, gotcha. And now I'm sharing their story, right? But I heard her say when he retired, he got very sick. And he passed away before he ever got that RV. And I left the coffee shop thinking, how many of us have dreams that go unlived? How many of us have something that we talk about all the time in our lives? We dream about it, and yet we don't take that next action step because our logical mind tells us it's not worth it, or there's some reason with it. It's like the dreams are little bubbles that come up, right? And I picture like blowing bubbles here. And as those dreams come up and start being called forward in our lives, the intellect starts going, costs too much, pointless, what would my friends think, what would my family think, pop, pop, pop to all the bubbles. And one of the biggest things that the intellect often comes up with as a really good excuse is, well, that's just frivolous, right? Like, it seems like there's no point, no value to it. After all, it's just a dream. And yet, those are the things, those dreams of our heart, that are anything but frivolous. They're calling us to live the life that we were meant to live, to be the people we were meant to be here on the planet Earth. And right now, what we need is the imagination to see those dreams, to see what is possible, and the faith to take action on them. Without the combination of imagination and faith, the intellect just takes over and pop, pop, pop. But to see the dreams into fruition, we need to imagine what is possible. When the intellect says no, our heart, our spirit inside of us is ready and willing to give us the guidance that we need to take the action step, whatever that may be in our lives. Eric Butterworth is probably one of my favorite Unity writers because of his ability to make things so simple. And he wrote, "Each of us is on a lifelong quest for truth, for meaning, for self-realization, for creative expression, for the awareness of oneness with God." And I know in the morning study, y'all are doing Discover the Power Within You. And of course, Butterworth goes more into that power that is within us, that is seeking to be known as us. This is our quest. And if we think of ourselves as like royal knights who've been given a quest by the king himself, would we say no? Or would we take action? Would we say yes to the quest and to all the treasures that come forward in doing that? So the first thing we need to do to say yes is to hear the call. And a lot of times that begins by recognizing that we're on a camel in the middle of the desert heading the wrong way. Right? When we take that moment and just go, where am I? Where's my community? Where's my family? And when things seem rocky, when things seem uncertain, unsure, that's how we know we're still on the camel. Camels are bumpy, right? So we're just thirsty, I'm thirsty, right? There must be something else. There's something that's calling us. And whether our individual dreams are those that seem to serve only ourselves, those that seem to serve our community, those that seem to serve our world, or those that seem specifically tied to spiritual growth. No matter what those dreams seem attached to, I assure you, when they are the dreams of your heart, they are all attached to spiritual growth. They're all attached to that transformation that is the mission vision. Right? It's that growth and transformation of consciousness. Consider the man with the RV. Now, I didn't know him, obviously, so I don't know the motives behind that. But there is the potential that this calling for an RV was really about liberation, about spiritual freedom. Perhaps there were people in the world that he was supposed to meet, That the light that was him was seeking to know those people, was seeking to be the light in more places. Perhaps he had a calling to know the beauty of nature that God created as a way of knowing himself more deeply. Again, we don't know his motives. We don't know Spirit's motives for calling him to this journey. And yet we can affirm that whatever our calling is a spiritual calling. And we can search for the meaning in it, or we can just say yes, right? Start taking action on it. And as we do, the meaning will be known to us. We will know what we need to know as we continue to take the steps. So I invite you to consider a moment, what are your dreams? What are those passionate dreams that keep bubbling up, that perhaps in the past intellect has said no to? Perhaps somebody in your family told you it was crazy. Perhaps you shared your dream with a friend and your friend squished it down a little bit. Do that later. Do you have a personal dream of a new career? Going back to school, traveling to India or somewhere exotic, learning to play a new instrument? Do you have dreams to better the world that we live in? Dreams to start a nonprofit? Dreams to see a new America empowering individuals? You have dreams of creating a book study towards religious tolerance. Have you had dreams to know yourself as the divine light that you are? Dreams that call you to be a living example of the divine incarnate. Dreams to know yourself as the Christ, as Jesus knew himself as the Christ, and to be a living, loving example of that in our world. What are your dreams? Sometimes we don't even know what our dreams are. We are so busy and so caught up in the camel ride that we forget how thirsty we are. And when that happens, we feel this sense of disconnect, this sense of isolation, of loneliness even. Within ourselves, perhaps within our community, we don't feel like we belong. And really that sense of isolation is feeling that we are disconnected from God in some way. And although the feeling itself may feel so real, we know that it is only an illusion. We can never be separate from God. In Acts chapter 17, verse 24, we read, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should be. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. Even as your own poets have said, we are his offspring. In him we live and move and have our being, even on the camel, Even when we seem so far away, the quest, the journey, the answer is right where we are. And it's about that shift in awareness and consciousness. Where am I? Who am I? How am I choosing to show up? And what is the next step I need to take? For myself, in knowing my dreams, in claiming them, I began a practice of keeping a journal in a non-traditional way. A journal in itself is a place where we can capture those dreams. Sort of like when those bubbles start coming up, instead of popping them with the intellect, we grab them with creative imagination. Grab them in a way that we can remember what they are whenever we see them. So whether it's keeping a journal by your bedside that you can just pull out and had a dream about this. What if I did this? It's those what ifs, maybe it's possible, that start to give birth to the knowing what I need to know. How do I step forward in action on this? So for myself, being a creative person, being an artist, I started keeping what I called visual journals. And these were places where I wrote ideas down, but more often than not, instead of writing, I used paint. I used markers. I used crayons. And when an idea or thought came to mind, I would open up my journal, and if it was just maybe a happy thought, I might just even just squeeze yellow paint onto the page and just start moving it with my hand and just feel happy. This color made me feel happy. The movement, maybe spiraling, made me feel happy. Touching paint made me feel happy. Perhaps for you it's baking or gardening. What do you get your hands into, right? That makes you feel happy. That you can release whatever that is that's going on in your life and start to birth something out of it. That's creative living. And creative living sparks that power of imagination within us. The power to visualize what isn't yet manifest and see it so. Into my journals, I use a lot of collage imagery. Now, many people might be familiar with the idea of vision boarding, creating something out of a collage. And oftentimes I would take onto my page, and maybe I would start with just this yellow happy, and just feel, what is this? What is this dream that is seeking to be birthed? And just movement of material onto page would start to allow the idea to come into my mind more fully. And then I'd turn to magazines and I just flip through, and anything that just caught my attention, I would just tear it out, stick it on the page, right on top of the yellow. And so often I would see this magical unfolding. It wasn't this idea of, now I'm going to take the pictures of whatever this dream is, but the images that Spirit would say, hey, take me, and I'd put them on the page. It was like a lot of times they would give me this little blueprint, and sometimes it would say something as bold as this: the next step is, go back to school or whatever. It was like, the next step is, and it was so crystal clear. And what happened was that by doing creative play, allowing the power of imagination to come forward, I released all that stuff, right? All of the intellect's claim to popping the bubbles. Play allowed me to just see the bubbles and play with the bubbles and what if, what's possible. Now, I know for many of you, the idea of creative expression as a way to hone into those spiritual ideas may feel very foreign. May feel like the camel ride, right? That's not me. I'm not creative. Those thoughts are bubbling up. I'm going to bring some Elizabeth Gilbert into the room for a moment. This is from her book, Big Magic. At least BJ's read it, so we've got 1 second on it. All right, so Elizabeth writes, are you considering becoming a creative person? Too late. You already are one. To even call somebody a creative person is almost laughably redundant. Creativity is the hallmark of our species. We have the senses for it, the curiosity for it, We have the opposable thumbs for it. We have the rhythm for it, the language, the excitement, and the innate connection to divinity for it. How much more creative can we be than recognizing that we are offspring of the Creator? Now, of course, your creative expression might not be paint, as mine is. That's my go-to. But when those ideas start bubbling up, I invite you this week to try playing with creativity. And it could be one of three things: movement, some sort of physical action, so painting, clay, sculpture, baking, right? There's bringing something into life that isn't already there is like a physical act. And then the third would be journaling. Now, a lot of times people kind of scoff at me whenever I mention journaling. You're either kind of like a, yay, journal person, or oh my gosh, journal person. So if that word frightens you, maybe that's the one to try, right? And it could just be write a word on a page and then walk away. It's one way to start it. But I invite you to try one of those three things. So movement could be when an idea comes to you and intellect starts going, ooh, pop, 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 recognize it, and then allow your body just to move into that. Maybe turn on some music and just move your body and go, what would it feel like to do that next step? What would it feel like to go back to school? What would it feel like to start a new business, start a nonprofit? What would it feel like to live this dream and feel it in your body? Just let your body move. I'm not a dancer, so I'm not going to do it here, but dance like nobody's watching, right? Do that. Find a space where you can be safe and let the dance be your prayer that brings the answers. Creative expression, as I gave that example of just moving materials on a page. It could be crayons. Just scribble for a little bit. Start drawing, Here's a little stick figure of me living my dreams. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Experience that through creativity. And the third, of course, would be journaling. When the idea comes to you, just journal it as if it were so. Just like we do positive affirmations. Thank you, Lord, for this healing right here, right now. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to live this experience. Write it down. What would it feel like? Where are you? What does it look like? Bring it into expression in your imagination. And in using the power of the imagination, the next step is known. So that's my creative challenge for you this week. Consider where you are. What journey are you on? Where are you in your journey? Consider using creative expression as that means to take the next step, to unfold for yourself the next step, to start heading back towards the ocean. Turn your camel. Head back towards source. And if you find, well, praise the Lord, I am in the ocean. When you take that moment and you go, where am I? And you go, I'm living my dream. I am doing it right here, right now. I am in the ocean. Then, my friends, your goal is to draw to you as many other fish that are out there in the desert to you. When you're in the ocean, that becomes the goal, is to continue being in the ocean, knowing you are a fish, continuing to be more fish-like or more Christ-like in your being, your expression, and every step that you take. And waving to the fish on the camels that pass you by and say, come on over, right? Help them on their journey to know who they are as you know yourself to be. I'm going to end by sharing Butterworth's quote one more time. I invite you to close your eyes if you'd like to. And just let this sink in. Each of us is on a lifelong quest for truth, for meaning, for self-realization, for creative expression, for the awareness of oneness with God. Imagine Imagine yourself to be a divine child of God, created in the image and likeness of the great Creator. Imagine you are co-creator of the reality you experience. Imagine God is talking to you right now, right here. Imagine all your dreams come true. Imagine it is true. And you will bring to being the awareness that it is true. And so it is. Thank you.